So the future of science publishing is the title of the meeting for today, and I thought, well, let's make it a bit bigger. The future of scientific publishing. Scientific publishing is about science, so let's talk about the future of science instead. Right? So where is science going? Because ultimately, where science is going will determine where scientific publishing is going. And I'm Frank van Harmelen. I am a professor at the Vrije Universiteit here in Amsterdam. I lead the Knowledge Representation and Reasoning Group, and I'm the director of the Hybrid Intelligence Center, which I will speak about later. So already in the introduction, we saw a historical view. I'm not going as far back as the first medical record in ancient Egypt, but if you look at the history of scientific teams, right, and sort of the road from Newton to Einstein is full of the brilliant individuals, right? It is from Newton onwards. Now we can all. You just need to walk through an Amsterdam neighborhood, and there's all the streets named after the famous physicists and the chemists and so on. Right? They're the brilliant individuals who were typically rich male individuals who were driving science. So this rather changed around the First World War, at the beginning of the 20th century. Maybe Einstein was the last of the single brilliant scientists, because after that science increasingly became a team effort, right? And I think the best example of this is Watson and Crick, who as a small team. And to be honest, the team was a little bit bigger, as we know, right? There are famous female names who were involved, but somehow never made it to the popular science historical record. But it was a small team of 2, 3, 4, depending on how you count people. But even that era has now gone. Right? What you see at the lowest picture is the team behind the Large Hadron Collider. Okay, and this is probably not the entire team, but this is just as many as they could fit in the experimental hall. So these teams have been. This is now a community. Science is now about very large teams, very large groups. But these teams are always still made up of humans. Right? These teams are always human collaborations. And what I would like to speculate on today is, can we move from human teams to hybrid teams, where a hybrid team consists of a collaboration between humans and artificial agents, between humans and computers. So think about that, right? Humans as colleagues in the scientific lab. Really? Right? Yes, really. So what I've done here is I've drawn sort of a version of the standard scientific cycle. Okay, what do my PhD students do? They begin by reading. Right? Thanks to the publishing industry, we faster and in larger volumes and more efficiently than ever before. We read the literature. Based on reading the literature, we generate new ideas, right? We generate new hypotheses, things that might be true, that have not been tested before. Based on these hypotheses, we design experiments to test the hypotheses. We execute the experiments and collect data. Then once we have collected data, and this is sometimes very large volumes of data, we interpret them. Sometimes the interpretation is hard because there's so much data. Sometimes the interpretation is hard because there's so little data. But from interpreting those data, we derive conclusions. We publish those conclusions in a paper, and they go again into the scientific record to be read by the next generation of PhD students and scientists. This is the scientific cycle as we all know it. And yes, I really mean machines as colleagues in every step of this scientific cycle. And this is not as far-fetched as you may think. So let us go through these steps and see what the state of AI is in each of these. So can we get our machines to read our scientific papers? You have to point this very precisely, otherwise... Yeah, so a little bit, right? So I've used a sort of a temperature metaphor here, right? So I see Barend frowning. So actually a colleague of mine, I think it was Hans Akkermans, who said that, and this is now in danger of insulting most people in the audience, that a journal publication is a state funeral for your results, right? It is its last journey. right? And the same, I think, maybe Barend said at some point, the only reason why we have to do information retrieval is because we first did information burial, right? We took our scientific insights and we buried them in English, and then we buried the English into PDFs, and then we have to start now doing complicated tricks with machine learning and information retrieval to get all the information back out again, right? It was also clear in my head, and now it's in a PDF, and now my computer can no longer read it, but only with great effort. And I think some of the speakers later on will actually talk about ways of making those results accessible for computers. So we can read papers by a machine to some extent, but not perfectly. Life is even harder when we talk about generating hypotheses. Right? So yes, we do generate hypotheses, and again, some of the speakers in this block are actively working on automatic generation of scientific hypotheses. My summary of the state of the art currently would be that the problem is not that we cannot generate scientific hypotheses, the problem is that we generate too many scientific hypotheses. The problem is not generating a hypothesis, the problem is generating an interesting hypothesis. And this is why I speak about hybrid teams. Right? I don't expect a computer to do this completely automatically. I think this is exactly an example where humans and computers can perfectly collaborate. And actually we have done very interesting experiments in my lab using the data from LD Connect. Because what is the judgment of an interesting, or the indication of an interesting hypothesis? Well, it is the background sound of the literature. Who is publishing on what? What topics are on the rise? What topics are on their way out? Who are the leading names in the field, and what are they working on? So the interest of a scientific hypothesis is not only judged by the hypothesis itself, by how it is embedded in the conversation in the scientific community. And LD Connect, I think, is a great way of making that conversation in the scientific community accessible to machines. So once we generate a hypothesis together with our computers, we have to design experiments. And unfortunately, I know very little work about AI attempts to automatically or semi-automatically generate these hypotheses. So this temperature indicator is really very low. I think there's a big gap there. Of course, the situation is better when we talk about collecting data. Now, this is exactly what computers are very good at. So that could somebody hit the yes? So both interpreting data and collecting data, machines are very good at, right? Collecting data also. So at physics experiments, they produce so much data they have to throw away 99% because it's likely to be boring. They're not even bothering to store it. Right? So there is machines involved in, at data collection point, filtering the data. And of course, then there is machines involved in interpreting the data. And then, of course, we have to interpret the conclusions. There is a little bit of machine support there, but not a lot. And then we would have to publish papers. And I'm afraid to say that there, again, the state of the art is very low. Right, so maybe you have seen in the popular press, the software from the tech giants, they can really generate credible newspaper articles, credible scientific papers. Don't believe a word of it, right? They are cherry-picking nice results. A computer can currently generate a reasonable paragraph. It can barely generate a coherent page. It can certainly not generate a coherent paper. So there is a lot of work to do there. And I've already mentioned the role of LD Connect in the hypothesis generation. I think a lot of some of the topics that Erik, Tobias and Barend will speak about address some of these other points. Now, how to get machines to read our papers? Well, only if we publish them in machine-readable format, if we no longer do information burial first. And how can we collect the data and make sure that machines can find these data? All of this will be in the next few talks. Oops. So this is part of what we are working on in the Hybrid Intelligence Consortium, which I had on the previous slide, which I can no longer get to. Yes. There's two of us driving some. Yeah, thank you. So hybrid intelligence is about building AI systems that collaborate with people instead of replacing them, right? So we are not out to build the automated robot scientist that does everything for us. We don't think that is even a credible or even very productive way to make our progress, but build systems that collaborate with people instead of replacing them. We have a large consortium and a large grant that allows us to work on this problem for 10 years. Hybrid intelligence. Next slide, please. Oops, there we go. So in order to make these hybrid teams, our computers must become more collaborative, obviously. They must become adaptive. They must adapt to changing circumstances and to us. They must be responsible. You can only work with a partner if they share your values, and they must be explainable. And I want to say a few words on three of these challenges, right? So, what does it mean to collaborate with somebody? Well, it means for a start to understand the goals of your collaborator, to have what the psychologists call a theory of mind, right? You have to, I need to know what my collaborator wants. And my collaborator needs to know that I know what she wants, right? And there is this mutual knowledge about each other. So this is called the theory of mind by psychologists. Currently, no computers have theories of mind, right? They barely know what we want, and they certainly they don't have this recursive theory of mind. But even small children have already very good theories of mind, and I want to show you a rather entertaining little video about that. What is this man trying to do?
Oh. Oh. So?
This is theory of mind in action, right? The little kid, how old will he be? Maybe 4 years old or something, right? He knows what this man is trying to achieve, right? And he knows that this man needs help. And so this is theory of mind. There is currently no computer that can do this. This requires reading the body postures of the man, knowing that it's not very comfortable to carry a heavy pile of books, knowing that cupboards are meant to store piles of books and that you feel happier if you no longer need to carry the pile of books. All this stuff is part of that theory of mind and making the computers more collaborative at least as a little kid there. Another example that I want to show you is about being responsible. So being responsible, I interpret for this purpose as sharing values, right? So being open, being transparent, not cheating about your data, not stealing other people's results, right? So those kinds of scientific values. Currently, these norms are programmed into a computer by the designer, right? So the designer has a set of norms, you write code, and when you are writing the code, you are injecting those norms into the code, right? Your code is not supposed to take bits of text from other papers and then publish it with your own name over it, right? What we are aiming for is not these values which are statically programmed into the code, right? But that these norms are inherently part of the computer itself, so that the computer itself can reason about these values and draw reasonable conclusions. So that the computer is not just acting on external values, but it is deliberating about internalized values. The final example is about making our machines explainable. So there's a little audience participation required here for explainability. So this is, if you check the Google Trends for the popularity of Song of Ice and Fire, which is a particular piece of music, popular music, right? This is a very strange curve for, most songs don't do this. Songs are unpopular, then they become popular, then they go out of fashion again. Sometimes there is a remake, they become popular again, but this is weird for a song, right? Can anybody explain to me why this song has this weird popularity trend? Is Barend the only one who's young enough to know that? Because, of course, the Song of Ice and Fire is the theme song for Game of Thrones. right? And every time there is a new season of the Game of Thrones, people read about Game of Thrones, and they hear about this Song of Ice and Fire, right? And then they start reading that book and listen to the song.
But I was
right?
wrong. It's not on Netflix. So
It's not, okay, right. Close enough, right? So we would like computers to, it would be easy to predict the popularity of this song based on this graph. It's just simple data science. But to understand why it has this curve, it really needs knowledge about the world. So we really need our computers to be collaborative, adaptive, responsible, and explainable. And using that, we really want to build something that we have called Einstein, okay? An AI colleague that really collaborates with us while we are doing science. And we are aiming by the time our grant ends, which is in 8 years from now, to really publish a paper like the following. A paper, let's choose a journal, let's choose AI Communications as a journal, where there are 3 authors, one of our young professors, one of our senior professors, and Einstein Mark III as one of the co-authors of the paper, because the computer has really contributed to every step of the scientific cycle. Thank you.